at least it will actually make experience the task of. Yeah, if they do it clear texting, there's like right at the beginning, you see it.
I'm normally a person like my network is now there were not that looks fun. I didn't use that. I'm wondering if
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started again, so make your way back. And set a couple of things. It is wirelessly connected to this box. It's a series of boxes connected through the air, through magic, or frequency modulation. Either way, most people think they're the same thing. Okay, we good? Yes. Okay, great. Let's everybody get back into the seats. The military defensive conversation is probably better to do at the bar this evening. If you guys want to continue conversations, they're out there. If you want to do a presentation, they're in here. Hey guys, I can totally hear you over my own head, so it's a cool conversation. But all right, so my name is Brian Richardson. We're going to start out with a presentation saying I'm not a security person, but I'm trying. That will become more obvious as we go through the presentation. I work on firmware. I've worked on firmware for the past 21 years, not the same piece of firmware. I have moved through firmware development, testing, skunkworks kind of projects into what they call technical marketing, which is explaining things to people in English instead of in technobabble. This presentation is kind of a blend of those two things. I want to basically bring firmware to everybody's attention because if you pay attention to stuff like Black Hat, which is in a very hot place where the beer isn't quite as good, and they scare you pretty much 3-4 days when you should be in a casino, and so you go up and go, please don't be my product, please don't be my product. Oh, it's my product. Oh! I got to do a keynote at a Vegas conference last year. None of my products came up in anybody else's presentations. It was great. I want to talk about firmware, which most people in here commonly know as BIOS, because it's kind of important. It's the first code on your platform, motherboard, and we'll use the term motherboard, that gets control of the system. So when you boot, and you see the cool little spinning wheel, or the logo of the company you bought the laptop from, or you're waiting for your graphics card to come up to turn on all your monitors and your really cool system at home, that's firmware doing that. And because it gets control at reset and is persistent on the motherboard, it's also responsible for making sure all the hardware in your platform is working. If you have the kind of thing like a real desktop system that old people like me build, it initializes all the add-in cards, checks the size of memory. Did you go to Best Buy and buy more memory? Nope. Okay, same memory as last time. We'll go with the same settings. Now, because of this, and by the way, all that usually lives on a little chip right here. That's an 8 megabyte SPI, serial platform interface, or serial peripheral interface. That's where all that lives. So tiny board, even tinier chip. Now that can be 4 to 16 megabytes of code. Anybody in here recently written a program under 16 megabytes? Probably not. Okay. Okay. Boring, right? We should all know that when we turn the motherboard on, and then a motherboard that makes it go. If you go to Black Hat, you're finding places to drop things into this code because it's persistent code that lives on the motherboard. If I get one of those nasty, supposedly Russian crypto virusy things that encrypts my hard drive and asks me for Bitcoin, I'm going to politely use a hand gesture. Yeah, I'll just tell them the number 4 in binary. We're number 4, we're number 4. Assembly programmers all laughed. And these are the bitmask and C laughed. Everybody else went like, I don't understand. So once that happens, I'm going to go to one of my many backups. I'm the kind of guy that keeps hard drives in a, like in a lockbox in a bank. It's like a really cheap Jason Bourne. There's like 25 bucks in there, a passport for one country with my real name on it, and a bunch of hard drives. It's really lame. But now that it's persistent code on the motherboard, if somebody gets it into that firmware, I can't format that out. I have a brick system. That's basically going into the junker, or for me, I can probably pull an SPI programmer out and do something with it. Okay, so this has now become the new place where people want to do hip things and hide stuff. And that makes your job as security professionals a lot harder. It makes my job as a firmware guy a lot harder because I have to learn the stuff that you're learning, because I write ANSI and assembly. That's my programming background. Right? Great stuff. So, what I want to talk about is why firmware is critical, so that you know why you should care for the next 48 minutes and change, why it's a popular target for attackers, the kinds of things that can be done in a firmware attack. What are your threats? What's your exposure? And then why the Super Mario Brothers were terrible role models for me as a child. Just trust me, I'll get to that. Okay, we're not going to cover a couple of things. This is not a specific attack session. I don't have the same problem the Army guy does about not being able to disclose NSA stuff. I can read WikiLeaks, but it's not really a wiki. It's a philosophical argument. But I'm not doing an attacker's how-to, right? If you want to learn that stuff, next summer in Vegas, knock yourself out. It's a little expensive, reserve your hotel rooms now. I'm not going to tell you how to develop firmware, because even after 21 years, I'm still kind of figuring that out. I will provide links for people who want to start looking at it. There are ways responsibly to do this using open source tools. And I'm not going to talk about non-Intel attack scenarios. I work for Intel. Aside from the Super Mario stuff, I'm representing my employer. They probably have different feelings about some of the memes I'm going to put in here. Whatever. But the point is that I'm not going to speak ill of competition. I'm not going to go out and say, well, these people had this attack and it was terrible because they can't design trusted code. No, I'm not going to do that. I know those people. We work on spec groups. They buy me beers in Vegas. Okay. Again, you have to go to a very strange place to understand this. You have to go into the mind of a firmware programmer, which is a very weird place to be. If a firmware developer does their job correctly, nobody knows they exist. For a guy who has technical marketing in his job title, this may have been a poor choice, but I've been gainfully employed for 21 years. Let's not ruin that. Let's take a typical firmware guy. Oh, right. Sorry. I'm the only one who signed the release. And look inside their brain, which is, again, a really weird place. And I understand how I think about firmware to understand why I choose to work on it for decades, continuing in hopefully a third one, because my house ain't paid for yet. Now, first of all, welcome to Asheville, North Carolina. I grew up in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Last 2 years of high school, I went to the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics in Durham, North Carolina. Any unicorns in the house? Ooh! Our mascot is the unicorn. That's right. You got all the nerds, 500 of them, into a school, and then you picked a mythical creature from the D&D campaign to be their mascot. Nice job. Not helping. Now, one thing you notice coming to Asheville is bridges. This little thing over the Blue Ridge Parkway, how many car commercials have you seen as a North Carolinian and going, they shot that BMW commercial, the Blue Ridge Parkway. Nice flyover helicopter shot, now it's a drone shot. By the way, Georgia thanks North Carolina for all of their film business. The cast of Sleepy Hollow says hello. We will happily give the tax breaks and take all your money out of Wilmington. Bridges are really important here. I spent a lot of time in Portland, where Intel has its largest concentration of employees. They love their bridges. We have bridges in Atlanta too. We had one a couple of months ago. Looked like this. This went about as well as you would have expected. Atlanta is an interesting kind of thing. So we have 3 interstates, 1 east-west, 2 north-south, which temporarily combine in the middle. Why do they combine in the middle? Because The DOT doesn't do redundancy very well, and somebody thought if I have two interstates in the same place, that's twice the federal funding on the same pile of pavement. That means there's a choke point right below one of the largest state highways, Georgia 400, which you call the Alpharetta Audubon. Yeah, that happened. I was in China. I was in Shanghai the day before I flew back. I'm just going to go back to Atlanta traffic. It's so much more relaxing than it is in Shanghai with 26 million people. Yes, exactly. And Atlanta said, hold my sweet tea. And somehow I was on Twitter from China, don't ask, and I saw this pop up, and I'm like, maybe I'll just stay in this taxi cab. It's nice here. We fixed this in record time because we threw millions of dollars as a bonus to the contractor to fix this ahead of schedule. It is the nicest, less than a mile of pavement in all of Atlanta. There's not a steel plate to be found. So I think of firmware like infrastructure because it is the thing that at the bottom of the software stack, the lowest part of the software stack you have, sitting right there over your little, well, let's ignore microcode. It's the lowest part of the software stack. Now, because I travel internationally a lot and do conferences, here, if you walk up to a water fountain, it's not really a thought. It's a water fountain. Free water. I will drink from the water fountain. Now, if I move, say, to Michigan, I'm going to think before I push the button on the water fountain. I'm going to look up and see the name on the water tower and then go, right, I should probably go down the street and get a Fresca. And you end up, if you wrote an assembly code, this is the image in your head when you were done, right? You're reading somebody's uncommitted Git commit of like a Perl script. This is kind of what you have in your head, and this is the way a lot of people have done firmware. It's just this low-level thing. I'll get to the cool OS code later, and let me just make this work. You know, this is just like duct tape and baling twine. And firmware was looked at this, especially in embedded devices. Things on the internet, there's a lot of this stuff going on under the hood. Because it's just U-boot. I'm going to be here for like 300 instructions and then I'm done. Why does it have to be well architected? So a lot of firmware people are learning that I need to think like a better plumber, right? Has anybody done their own home plumbing? Like from the start, not fix the thing that they came in afterwards? Okay, I've done both. And the reason I did some of the plumbing from the start is because in the trailer that my wife and I bought, modular home on the property that we bought, it was done with kind of like, you know, blind apprentice plumbing sort of thing. Yeah, and it's all like, you know, whatever came before Trex, that 1970 stuff that you torque down a little metal band over plastic and run hot water through, because that's going to work really well. No, there were lawsuits. We didn't qualify for them. So I redid a lot of the plumbing in my house. And then when we built our barn, I did all that myself from scratch. Learned a couple of things. You pressure test. You open all the taps before you turn the water on first to make sure everything flows, and then you slowly close taps one by one to check all the pressure. When you hit the last one, you're going to find out real fast if you glue down all the joints or not. Spoiler alert, I didn't. Hit in the face with my own plumbing, and then had to run to the street because we hadn't put in the shutoff yet at the halfway point. And you would think, wait a minute, we're all nerds. We have a plumber as a role model. Mario and Luigi. Now, first of all, why are the Super Mario Brothers? There's Mario and Luigi. Is it Mario and Luigi Mario? Is Luigi the nickname like we named the dog Indiana? Anyway, do not look to them for plumbing. They're awful. Do they ever fix a pipe in the games? They destroy pipes. There's just a sea of bricks, gold coins, and just like dead turtles. And this is their legacy. And what do we think of? Well, it's a plumber. He doesn't do any plumbing. He breaks infrastructure. They're these guys. Now, for any youngsters out in the world, just don't go Google that. For anybody who's of the right age to remember that, it's available on RiffTrax. So again, firmware is this kind of baseline. If I'm looking at the plumbing, if I'm going to put in the gold toilet fixture, okay, I'm not in political office. I'm going to put in like something that I get from like normal plumbing stores. I have to build it on a solid base, and I have to make sure all the pipes down at the foundation work. So my firmware infrastructure initializes the hardware, sets up root of trust, because again, I'm the first code to launch. I am the trusted thing that sets up everything else on top of that. If I don't have root of trust at that point, Everything built on top, no matter how securely you architect it, is vulnerable. And then I hand off to the operating system. So somewhere underneath, I've got the code that I want, and I got the code that I don't. I hate that dog. He's coming back later. And you would think, again, as nerds, we would be better at threat modeling because of this dude. So I wrote an article a couple of years ago for the Intel Developer Zone. I'm one of what they call evangelists. Basically means I'm an engineer and they realize I can write and talk. So I just describe software to people. And if you want to talk about threat modeling, Star Wars is a great place to go because you have R2-D2. Now think of the Death Star as a firewall. And you brought in a bring your own device. Now, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, they had USB-C because you didn't have to flip the droid over to plug him in, right? First time, right there. But what do? You let this bring your own device in. He can connect to the network without authentication. And he connects to unsecured assets. If they had locked the garbage chute down, Star Wars is a 44-minute movie where the rebels lose. And after you've seen Rogue One, that's really depressing. Speaking of Rogue One, really, they haven't learned anything. I know it's a prequel, but still, throughout the entirety of the whole prequels, shut down one computer, all the droids die. You'd think they'd be better at this. Now the droids are independent. You can take this one, flash over his low-level software. Did they sign the updates for the droids? Because these guys in like a garage just flash over a military-grade robot, and then he just shows up at their base and reprograms another robot. I mean, come on, really? And the thing is, this is a network attack scenario. These two droids are the perfect network attack scenario. You brought in a device you thought was trusted, let it connect to your network without validating if it was the original software base, and it exploits your network. Now, let's get into the actual firmware stuff and not stop poking fun at George Lucas, although I could do that for hours. There are two general classes of firmware I'm going to talk about. One is what we typically know as BIOS. Its heritage is from the 1980s PCAT, PCXT architecture, i.e. the beige box that launched a million clones. Not the clones in the Clone Wars, the clone PCs that match the architecture low level of the original IBM PCXT and PTAT. And because that BIOS interface is consistent, that's what allowed all those computers to run the same DOS. Compaq won a lawsuit about reverse engineering because they had cloned in a clean room environment the BIOS. Now IBM didn't help their case by publishing most of the routines in the little purple book that came in the box. I have that purple book, it's great. And you still have to rely on it because there's still code. If you boot Windows 7, there's still code that calls 16-bit interfaces to boot. And they're using table references from 1981 to 1985, hard-coded spots below 1 megabyte in memory. Because this is a terrible idea to continue using, in 2004, we launched the UEFI, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. This is the same thing the BIOS does without the architectural limits and being stuck with like assuming 1 megabyte of memory is a great idea. Now the second kind of firmware you get is coupled bootloader and OS. Phone, watch, things on the internet that accounts make fun of because they can be hijacked by 5-year-olds, firmware updates to make your light bulbs work. There's a light bulb, smart light bulb is susceptible to a replay attack. How can something that has one button that has two positions be susceptible to replay? Okay. I'm going to talk mostly about UEFI. One, it's the spec I actually understand. I wrote parts of it. If you read the USB 2 part of the UEFI spec, I'm sorry, that was my fault. But it's a popular attack target because it is the standard. If you buy a Windows 10 laptop, it has to be UEFI. Even if you get the new like Qualcomm devices that are coming out, they have to be UEFI. If you buy an off-the-shelf rack server, UEFI. There may be compatibility code underneath, but this is the core stuff that runs it. Because it's based on a very large single spec, there's a big book that tells everybody how the surfaces work, what are the APIs. So we're going to read it and try to find holes in it. Now, issues can be mitigated on this. It's user configurable. It's typically designed to be like a walk-up and use system. But you're going to find that a lot of embedded and IoT devices run UEFI under the hood. They just don't advertise it. And there's a big open source base that we can work off of. Now, BIOS is a weird business. In case you don't understand how this goes, you move over here just to love the other half of the audience and mess with the camera guy. You've typically got, camera guy's like, great, I gotta get up now. All right, so you typically turn on a system and you'll see the American Megatrends logo, worked there for 15 years. You'll see the Phoenix logo inside. If you're Chinese, you'll see a logo from a company called Biosoft, or you'll just see HP, Dell, Asus, whatever. Typically, there's one of 4 major companies that provide base code for the firmware. They're taking some stuff from a BSD license project that my company works on along with others. So Intel, Linaro, who's the company behind ARM open source, Apple, all contribute to this thing called Tiana Core. BSD license, UEFI base. BSD means you can take it, revise it, not OS the code back. That goes into silicon vendor code. Could be binary, could be source. Goes straight to the people who make it. They combine that to make a general platform. So your processor, chipset, LAN, USB widgets, whatever, they all live on the board. And then somebody comes along and customizes it, and then you get the secret sauce. Ooh. Why can an MSI board overclock in a way that an Asus board doesn't? Why does one company have a recovery method another company doesn't? Can your motherboard go straight to a website and update the BIOS directly connected to the internet without an OS? Secret sauce. That's why you can't take an MSI BIOS and flash it on top of an Asus motherboard. Right? Because the hardware's just enough, there's just enough difference, so they moved GPIO to mean this when it's high instead of this when it's low. And now that's customized. And a lot of the stuff's still like on your phones, right? The bootloader on your phone is super customized. So you can't just take like a Samsung loader and decide to run on an LG phone. One that would make, start a small war in South Korea, but also just ain't gonna work. The architectures, even if they're the same core processor, the architecture of the board's just different enough to where that's gonna throw it off. Okay, so now you have 3 main categories of RISC. Now these fall into executing a piece of code ahead of the OS loader, bootkit, rootkit style attack. I got in before the firmware handed off to the OS, so I snuck something in before it ran. I got somebody into the club before they put the velvet rope up. Modify firmware contents. I snuck something into the club before they even showed up for work. Privilege escalation. I pretend I belong at the club, which is any place they call the club would be me pretending that I belong there, unless I'm like there to fix the sound or something. Okay, so let's look at the software stack, because we're doing a software presentation, we have to have a stack diagram. Hardware's down here. I'm going to break it down into basic things: I/O, memory, processor, graphics, network. Middle, platform firmware, specifically UEFI, because I'm going to talk about some architecture concepts in UEFI. I'm not going to read you the whole UEFI architecture spec, right? Even I fell asleep in that and I wrote this. And then on top of it, you have 2 upper layer pieces of software. One you're used to, and that's the OS stack, and everybody here knows a little OS stack with all the kernel piled on top of this, piled on top of that, and the apps are up here. Then the idiot user that causes all the problems is like way up at the top. Off to the side, you have something called runtime. So firmware typically leaves a runtime image. It's a small footprint of information the operating system needs. If I close the lid on my laptop, it goes to sleep. Now, if you did that 20 years ago, you were a magician, because advanced power management was awful. I wrote some of that. I'm sorry. Especially doing an NEC notebook, I'm really sorry. But what it does now is that somewhere in the firmware it says, hey, operating system, you're going to need to know that this little pin is the lid on the laptop, so you can set a power policy and decide if you want that to do something or nothing. If I hit the power button, it makes this little part of the silicon light up, so the operating system knows I'm going to use this to shut down or hibernate. So it's leaving descriptions. It's leaving a way to set the time so that the OS can set the time on the way out. It can leave breadcrumbs in the NVRAM. If a server crashes and it's before the hard drive controller came up, or when the hard drive controller is going down, you can't store that on the hard drive. The hard drive controller doesn't work. And if it's a display error, you can't put it on the screen, yay! So you're going to leave it in an NVRAM and an error log. So those are the kind of services you leave up and running. Okay, so let's start with the OS loader. The most common attack, and this is what you're going to see in stuff like ransomware, is a bootkit or rootkit style attack. I have an OS loader, it lives on a disk partition. It used to live in a magic sector of the drive, and the firmware would just hand off to the sector and go, I hope everything turns out. We don't do that anymore. That was an MBR style attack. Those are those, like you put in a floppy drive in the lab in college and all of a sudden all your floppy drives are infected because you had this little sector thing that you didn't scan for, and now everybody's got it. Yay. So most of the, like your ransomware works by implanting one of these, encrypting the hard drive, and then when you boot up, the thing that tells you where to get the bitcoins is in the boot sector or in the bootloader of the OS. So you have to watch out for where the firmware is getting its boot instructions from. Now the second thing you can do is you can go down into the hardware. Now let's say that you win the lockpick challenge and you get a shiny new NVIDIA, was it like G something 160 card, right? A 1060. I have an AMD, I don't care. Sorry, it's not like an East Coast, West Coast thing. My video editing software likes AMD better. Now when you put that in your computer, it knows how to talk to your computer. You didn't change any of the code on the board, you just dropped it in there. You get a network card, and you drop it into a server. It instantly knows how to network boot, presents you a little configuration menu. How does it know how to do that? Just like the motherboard, it carries a little option ROM. It has code that the firmware looks for, and it dispatches that through a driver execution environment piece of code we call dispatcher that sits in the firmware. So the firmware initializes the base hardware, turns on the PCI Express root port, and says, is there anything out there you need to show me? And one of the cards says, yes, for I am a SATA card, and I will give you a place to initialize myself. And so, great. And then you can update that driver. And if you don't secure the update on that driver, someone can sneak code in, and they get control during the dispatcher phase and drop that code in before you're even up and running. So that's bad. Now, the third thing that happens is a privilege escalation. Because, again, the UEFI platform firmware is responsible for building the runtime system. Now that means it can put stuff in so that it intercepts calls that the OS would make back to its platform code. Or, everybody familiar with Ring 0 as a concept? On Intel platforms, there's two privilege levels behind that. What a lot of people in Black Hat will call Ring -2 is what we call System Management Mode, or SMM. We snuck some code into a memory window that's only visible from a special interrupt on the processor. And operating system companies both love this and hate it. They hate it because we're sneaking out behind them, and they love it because if there's a bug in the operating system, they can go, hey, can you put this fix in SMM? Because we did kind of a bad thing. So it's used for a lot of weird things like CC memory scrubbing and a lot of other interesting cleanup routines. And some of your servers have management code that lives in SMM. And they'll try to put secret sauce over there. So those are three different ways that firmware can get stuff snuck in underneath, behind, around, whatever. Okay, so this is probably the face you're all making right now. Right? Great, Brian. Scared the crap out of us. It's not even time to go to the bar yet. No, that's why they normally leave me for last at these things, because you need a drink afterwards. Okay, no. Now normally I present to firmware developers and tell them why they should not do the things. Instead, I'm going to change this a little bit and talk to you as people who are pen testing and fixing as to what can you do as far as mitigation. Is there anything simple you can do to fix a lot of these issues now? And is there something that you need to do that, you know, when you buy a new system, is something you should be looking for that's going to magically make this go away or make this less of a problem? So again, there are features you can turn on now that fix a lot of this, or at least make it harder for somebody to implement this kind of hack. And when you go to buy new things, once you update the firmware when you buy it, please update the firmware when you buy it, you can also test for these issues to see if any of your updates contain known problems. Okay, first, like seriously, if you travel with your laptop and you don't have a boot password set, really? All right, anybody familiar with the evil maid scenario? Show of hands? Okay. First of all, I don't like dissing particular job types. Everybody's important. I stay in a lot of hotels. I like the housekeeping staff. A lot. They're my friends. Okay, but if you walk up with a USB key and plug it in and turn on a laptop and you don't have a boot password set, it's trivial to make it boot off of that key instead of the main thing. Like a Bash Bunny has a particular mode where you flip a switch and it becomes a USB storage device. So you can plug that thing in, turn the laptop on, and you can boot to whatever image you want. Now, Bash Bunny, of course, also lets you do that over a virtual network internally, but you can shut down network booting as well. And then if you are doing a headless system like a server in a rack, then you don't want to do a boot password because you don't want the server to reset and go, type in your password, and you're at home on a Sunday, because you're a sensible person. So you want to set an admin password so someone just can't walk in. If you turn off like the fun little Thunderbolt protection where you can plug in a Thunderbolt thing that has a PCI Express card on it with an FPGA that exploits your system, does exist. You can change a bit in the firmware that stops that DMA attack from working. And then the attacker walks right in, goes in the same setup menu, turns the bit off, and then attacks your system anyway because you didn't set an admin password. This kills a lot of problems right there. And this is built in, even Apple has this as a feature now. They didn't for a long time, but on the newer Macs, this is available. Okay, someday we're all going to go shopping for new stuff, right? We have an economy, I've heard. It's good. Well, unemployment's kind of low. We're going to buy stuff. Some of it's going to be made here. That'll be great. Okay, things you can enable on a system now that will help you. The two favorite are UEFI Secure Boot and the TPM, Trusted Platform Module. Okay, first of all, when I said UEFI Secure Boot, probably a couple of people went, but I use Linux, and Linux people hate Secure Boot because Secure Boot doesn't work with Linux, and no, that has not been the case since 2011. Linus wrote an email in early 2011, and he was right then, and we fixed it. And then everybody goes back and reads the 2011 email and puts it on Reddit, and says Secure Boot doesn't work, instead of reading the manual that comes with your Linux distribution and realize that it works. I know the guy who wrote the code. I know the buddy that he works with that wrote the code. They're named Matthew Garrett and Peter Jones. One's still at Fedora, the other one works at Google. Code works. UEFI Secure Boot, basically, everybody signs their bootloaders against a standard certificate authority. And then you can enroll those matching public keys into your firmware and turn on Secure Boot. And then if you have a cert from the certificate authority that matches the certificate authority that signed the loader, yay, you win. And you're not having to log into a server to do that because you went against the same CA. So it's very quick. Doesn't really, it's like adds milliseconds to the boot maybe. Now it does another important thing. When Secure Boot's on, only things that are Secure Boot, whether they're option ROMs or loaders, can be loaded. That means it turns off compatibility for 16-bit only code. That means your customers, when Secure Boot's on, can't run Windows 7 or Windows XP. Wonderful side effect. But it also means they can't take an old DOS stick and go, I'm going to run some DOS utility. I've got the little bit. No, can't do that. There is a UEFI utility shell. The CA refuses to sign the shell. Refuses. Because they know the shell can be used to run circumventions. Now, here's the wonderful thing if you're a Linux user, especially if you're going to roll your own IoT product, you can make your own keys. That means you can sign your own custom kernel with your own, you can be your own key exchange, and you could lock out a product that doesn't have your signature. That means you can run a Linux system that locks out Windows. That's a great feeling. A bunch of free software people went, oh, I didn't think about that. That's great. Wrote a white paper, it's easy to do. All right, second is TPM. TPM is a measurement system. If you run Secure Boot, you're basically saying, you're good, you're good, you're good, up to the OS handoff. Now, the OS can look at the TPM, which is hashing measurements during the boot process in a platform configuration register, or PCR, and then it can essentially do a look back in time. If you're like the last boot that I trusted, nothing's changed, then the PCR should be exactly the same. If I take the same route to work, and I'm methodical, then I should take about the same amount of time. I should take the same number of steps. If I was tracking somebody on a trucking company, and I saw one day that their delivery took 15 minutes extra, but there weren't any traffic jams, I would guess something's up. That's kind of what a TPM does. Now, there's another myth in the world that Secure Boot requires the TPM, which is problematic if you export to certain countries or use an older version of TPM, because TPM from the 1.2 spec earlier has export restrictions, specifically to places like China and Russia, which have their own kind of other problems exporting electronics, but that's a different issue. Not going to solve that one. TPM 2.0 removes some of those restrictions and also doesn't rely on things like SHA-1, yay! So it's a much better system to go with. And in the case when you use BitLocker or measured boot or The secure boot requirements for Windows systems, they typically require secure boot and TPM are both activated. So if you're using full BitLocker, all of these things plus hard drive encryption are turned on. Okay, when you go shopping later on, you're going to look for a couple of things. One, you want a vendor that gives you a signed firmware update. Seems pretty simple. There's a Black Hat presentation out there. I'm not going to tell you which one. Go hunt for it. They list two of the top Taiwanese vendors, the number of firmware updates they put out in a period of time, and how many of them were signed for the X number of products they support. The answer, surprisingly, is 0. Yeah, and these are big companies, one of whom does something else bad that I'll talk about later indirectly, that makes it, even if you sign the update, you could still mess with them. You want a vendor that signs their updates, because you want to trust that the update's coming from the right place. The best way to use a signed update, state-of-the-art, is called Capsule. Because if you have an update, you typically run a weird little utility, like a DOS utility or a Windows utility. Windows, if you're lucky. If you're in Linux, updating firmware from Linux, that's hilarious. So you have an OS problem. Plus, it's a utility. Now you have this other piece of code in the way. What if the firmware could update itself? If you don't trust version 1 of the firmware from the factory, you have a different problem. I cannot solve it for you. But if you trust version 1, then version 1 should be able to update to version 2, and then version 2 to version 3. And as long as the signature matches, everything's good. So Capsule allows the OS to stage it in memory, but then the firmware executes its own update. So now you have root of trust, preserving root of trust, preserving root of trust. This already works in Windows and Linux. If you own a Surface product, Surface Pro, Surface Book, Surface Studio, this is how you do firmware updates that come from Windows Update, the same mechanism you get your driver updates. Dell has enabled a system with Red Hat called FWUPD, which is built into the newer kernels of Linux. And then hardware root of trust. All right, Intel makes a thing called Boot Guard. It's available on the newer systems. We fuse keys with the OEM at the factory. So Intel and the OEM insert a key, and the firmware comes in 3 chunks. And some of the chunks are signed by Intel, some by the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. So that way, even with signed Capsule, there's another check going on for the update, and each one of those has to pass a phase verification as it goes through boot. And we actually use this on a lot of the Atom products that end up as things like gateways or IoT edge devices. Okay, a little shout out to the government here. The Commerce Department has this thing called NIST. NIST makes recommendations, not specifications, recommendations on how to do security properly. There's an entire section 800, which is nothing but cybersecurity, because we're the best at the cyber, right? Okay, so 800-147 and 800-147B are BIOS protection guidelines for standard systems and server systems. And then the draft, which just closed in comments, 800-193, is firmware resiliency. So how do you protect firmware at a basic level, and how do you make sure that firmware basically can recover? So if you have a system that you have to nuke from orbit, can you make sure the firmware is trusted and the firmware can recover itself in a way so that it's safe to then recover the entire system? Remote provisioning of a rack full of servers, for instance. Now, a couple of important things. One is that 800-147 is about 6 years old now, but it's now an ISO specification. So instead of just being a U.S. commerce requirement, it's now a standard you can use worldwide. So this means that the bottom line is really important. Manufacturers may have to comply with this to meet certain purchasing requirements. If you are speccing out a system where you have to help as a consultant do a bid for a large installation, make sure they're not citing this as a purchasing requirement. If they are, you have to check with all the vendors to make sure they comply with it. If you do a government bid, you can almost guarantee that the NIST 800 requirements are going to apply to it, and that your vendor of hardware, whether it's the peripheral add-in card or the motherboard, has to comply to 800-147 or 800-193. So this is also a nice thing to look for just in general purchasing, because most of the companies aren't going to make a government spec and a consumer spec for things anymore. They're just going to make one. So if they can meet the government requirement, they should be able to meet your company in an old barn house in North Carolina requirement. This is a really cool building. Okay, firmware updates. Again, make sure the right firmware update's coming along. You don't want the wrong stuff suddenly like popping out from underneath your hardware going, ah, I really hate that dog. Ah, man, they ruined a lot of my 80s. So firmware update, signatures and verification, is it the right board? Who here has built a gaming system? Okay, can you keep straight which MSI motherboard or ASUS motherboard you slap down on that thing? Is it the B variant, the C variant, is it one with the blue LED, the purple LED, or maybe it's mauve? I can't really tell sometimes. So if you get the wrong firmware version and they're not verifying the board check for you or they're not signing it properly, you could accidentally flash the wrong firmware in the system and you have a very nice shiny brick now. Doesn't even make a lot of heat because it might not even turn on the fan. Is it signed? You should ask your vendors if they signed their firmware. Are they preventing rollback? This is a really important thing in Capsule. Capsule can specify the last version of firmware you can roll back to. There's an exploit in version 5, and you upgraded to version 7, someone shouldn't be able to come along and drop version 5 back on the board. And that's a way that people have defeated this sometimes. They know there's a version of the firmware that has a problem, so they roll back to the old one. And run the exploit, even though you did the right work and updated everything in your enclave. So even if Capsule's not name checked in the requirements, you should still get a vendor that gives you secure updates. All right. Again, scared you a little bit. Don't worry, we're working on it. So there are 3 things that I work on primarily called ecosystem problems. Ecosystem. See, when you talk about the cloud, it's this big hand motion. Ecosystems are closed hand motions, right? Because we're all working together. So you have a cloud ecosystem for backing up your cat videos, right? So one is we leverage a lot of open source. More eyes make for better code. Second, we push standards so that if I go out and buy a motherboard from company A, I have to get an OS that's specifically made for company A's motherboard. This still exists a lot in the embedded space. We're trying to cut back on that. It just cuts down on vendor choice. And also test tools. If I tell you there's a problem out there, I should probably also tell you how to find it and fix it. If I used to teach martial arts to kids, if I'm going to teach you how to block, I'm probably also have to teach you the punch that you need to block out of the way. I'm not going to show you, I'm not going to grab you if I'm not going to show you how to get out of the grab, right? So, developers. Fuzzing and symbolic execution. Most of your API, buffer overflow kind of stuff, you could find programmatically. So we spent a lot of effort. We bought this company called Wind River years ago. They make a product called Simex. It's a platform simulator. Friend Jacob lives over in Sweden. His PhD, really sharp guy, gives great trade show presentations, is working on this thing called Excite. We take a simulated system. It's a bit-for-bit match of the platform that we ship. We use it for early development. And we beat the snot out of it. Just every kind of interface we can throw at it. If it wants integers, we throw unsigned. If it wants strings, we throw garbage. And we try to see how we can break the APIs. And since we have full visibility of the system through simulation, it makes it easier for us to narrow down and close those gaps. He wrote an article about this last month on Intel's Developer Zone. So if you're interested in like this kind of stuff, the link's going to be in the presentation I post. All right. Validation. A group that used to work at McAfee that now works on my team, mostly in Oregon, is writing a tool called ChipSec. This is a security validation tool. We go to all the same conferences everybody else goes to. We know all these people. Sometimes we're the ones presenting. I'm not in Vegas this time, obviously, but this is a lot cooler. So if there's a known exploit, we work with them in advance. We don't like 0 days. We typically work with people pre-disclosure, just like a responsible industry group should, get all of the stuff deployed, and then we release the information about the issue and immediately have a ChipSec test that's ready to go public. Now, if a 0 day does happen, we scramble, use a lot of profanity, and then put this out eventually. But most of the time, we're working with the disclosure period, and Intel does have a bug bounty that encourages people to work through responsible disclosure. Firmware is covered by the bug bounty. This runs in the UEFI utility environment or at the OS level. And it's a full GPL license. And if you want to go out and buy a Windows system and say, I wonder if this is going to run Linux before I drop a lot of money on it, we have this thing called Love. It's a single image that you flash on a USB key, you plug it in, and it runs a bunch of Linux validation tests, including ChipSec. And It'll show you if there's any problem with that system running Linux, and also show you any of the known security issues. Now, firmware has a variety of attack surfaces. This includes the updates, the vendor features, bad coding practices, like, I don't know, these, not locking SMRAM, where the system management mode lives. You know that thing that's the window behind the operating system? When you write a routine into it, you're supposed to close the memory window off. Some people don't. The SPI part is mapped directly into memory. When an Intel system reboots, since it's x86 compatible back to the 1980s, it starts out at the same reset vector, the 16 bytes below 1 megabyte. That's mapped into a physical address in memory. It's supposed to turn that off when you get to the end of the boot. Spoiler alert, sometimes they don't. So we have all these tests. They typically point back to an embarrassing and interesting presentation at CanSec or DEF CON, but we do post that information. And all that stuff's written in Python, and there's training materials to tell you how to write the scripts. You want to start messing with this stuff so you can give me headaches? I mean, so that you can contribute to the wonders of open source? Great. Intel does a project called MinoBoard. For about $150 US, you can buy an Intel Atom platform that has all the Gerbers in Creative Commons, that has the firmware minus a couple of blobs that have extra licensing in open source. So you can download a board, get the matching source code to go with the firmware, build the firmware, flash it onto the board through a standard 8-pin header through a $40 device called a SPI hook, and then go to town. Debug it over the serial port. If you have a Raspberry Pi, it's the same serial port. And we have people that make commercial designs based on this. They just don't bother with all of our non-disclosure agreements. They buy this thing from Mauser, and then they make their own design with all the open source stuff. We're going to put out another version based on the newer silicon probably November. Yes. We'll talk about the cancellations over several beers. Yeah, but this is all Atom-based products. It's not part of the recent cancellation of the lower-end products. It's not in the Joule or Quark line. So this is unaffected by that. In fact, that MinoBoard Max is now the kind of standard if you want to do a maker thing at Intel. And it's really like, it's $149, but we don't subsidize those. So if you wanted to go out and build that board, you could probably build it cheaper than $149 because we're sourcing higher-end components and we're doing small manufacturing runs. If you went out to buy another maker board, some of those are subsidized, and you either can't buy the part because you're not part of the foundation, or you can't make it for the amount of money they sell it for because you don't have the subsidy from the foundation. So it's a different way of doing an open design. If you find an issue, don't email us in plain text. Don't put it on the message board on Developer Zone. Either go to USRT, which is the industry response group, get the PGP key for the email and send it. Or go to the secure Bugzilla we have on Tiano Core and enter it as a security item, which you never email, goes into a special locked non-public area of Bugzilla, and everybody that's in USRT can track it so that it doesn't just show up in plain text in somebody's FTP site. Yay! Why are we still doing that? But this is important, is that we actually, like a lot of the things that you've seen, some of the NSA stuff, sorry, it exists, and some of the things that just got disclosed at Black Hat and DEF CON went through these processes first and got proper disclosure. So the stuff that's out at DEF CON, we already know about and have mitigations for. All right, this went by kind of fast. We've learned many things, and there's a bunch of resources at the end of the presentation on where to get open source materials, where to get the tests. But I wanted you to walk away from this with a better understanding of firmware and what it means for your average use. So remember, firmware is the persistent software that lives on your devices. Your thermostats connected to the internet, the various things connected to that, laptop, server, whatever. It's got some kind of firmware. It might be standards-based. It might be 3 people in a garage. I'm not going to say 3 guys in a garage anymore because it's the 21st century. Could be anybody. It's critical to security. If you don't trust the firmware, no matter what you do on top of that, no matter how many keys you roll on top of it, you might have something going on underneath it. So you need to work with a trusted vendor, and if you're designing a product, there's probably somebody in here plotting a little startup. Great! buy some of our open source stuff, try it out, understand the firmware, and don't gloss over it. It's not just it's a speed bump to get on the information superhighway. I don't want it to be a pothole. It's a popular attack target because if you get something in there, it sticks around. There's some very uncomfortable medical analogies I could make there, but this is being recorded, so I won't. It is defendable. I didn't just come here to scare you and go, good luck, and then head for a craft brewery, right? There are ways to stop these things. They're as simple as a boot password on your laptop to prevent a lot of simple walk-up attacks. So when you go to get a piece of pizza, at the conference buffet, somebody just doesn't walk up with a bash bunny and boot your laptop. I'm trying to, by the way, figure out how to use the bash bunny to do nice testing, not mean testing. I want to write some firmware routines for it that we can disclose the same way we do chipsec. And it's not a place for unskilled plumbers. I mean, really, and this is something that I have to say to a lot of firmware developers. A lot of us are electrical engineers who worked on microprocessors who didn't get into the cool kids club making cloud applications. So all of our skills are kind of low-level, bare bones. We're used to flipping bits. So programming practice and firmware has not always been at the top skill level, and we're working on that. So we're doing things in C. We have people that are trying to write stuff in Rust in the firmware level. We have people that are recommending you to Go at the firmware level instead of C. We're doing more fuzz testing. We're doing more symbolic linking. We're doing a lot of virtualization testing. We use QEMU a lot. We use Symmex a lot. So we're trying to come up to the same level as the people that you're trying to match wits with in the attack world. And hopefully, if we all understand what we're doing, it's going to work out a lot better. I have a blog. I have a Twitter account. Yeah, I know. I put a QR code in here. Just no one scanning it? Nice job. Oh, he's scanning. Bless your heart. You're scanning a QR code at a security conference. That's brave. No, it's fine. It just goes to my blog on the developer site. I also just love using bless your heart. It's one of the great Southern sayings. And y'all does solve a legitimate grammatical problem. Don't be afraid to use it. I've introduced it to my friends in Oregon. Remember, we have y'all in the firmware community and all y'all out there in the security world. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Snow.
I'm Phoenix Snow.
And
Really loud.
yeah, we sound really loud though, but now, is this better? Okay. And our talk is Hacking the IoT, a Case Study. So first, how this talk is organized. So we're going to do our contact information at the end for anyone who wants to know, but we have some candy left over from another event with our contact information if anyone would like it. So I was going to pass it around now. Then we're going to do a little introduction, and then we're going to do a brief look at IoT security standards. Yes. And we'll talk about our methodology and our results, and then how you can set up your own IoT hacking lab. And then we'll do our contact info and questions. Would anyone else over here like candy?
Nobody was passing it, so.
Yeah, it's chocolate. Here. Pass it around. See if anyone wants any. Okay, so why a talk on the IoT? Well, there's all these news stories about people being concerned about insecure devices, the Bickerback vigilante worm, botnets. So are people building Skynet? Can the IoT ever be secure?
In terms of whether the IoT can be secure, I'm sure it could be. However, at this point, at a minimum, it seems like there's kind of an entire generation of devices that are already out there that the support for them is questionable at best. So there's already a lot of insecure devices out there to begin with. Additionally, this is a really, really large market, and it's been expanding very quickly. So there are actually some concerns, without trying to sound too paranoid, but there are concerns with these companies getting people's data, and whether the companies are using them for bad purposes or not, they're not storing the data in secure manners, so it could be somebody entirely unrelated to the company or the device getting your access to this data and using it for malicious purposes.
And we thought everyone else is hacking IoT devices, why shouldn't we? So then we had to decide what type of device to hack. And we just one day went out and bought a smart light bulb. Not this one, I will say this is just the picture I chose. The one we bought I couldn't find a picture of because it totally didn't work when we got home. I mean, it's a nice light bulb, but the whole internet part didn't work.
We had found out after the fact that apparently they had some problems with it, and they decided to patch out internet access with the intent of patching it back in later. Whoops.
Yeah, it is secure.
It's a nice light bulb. We do use it for that. So we decided to do a little research before buying another IoT device. And so the next thing we considered was this great smart egg tray. But it lets you know when you're out of eggs, but you have to remove your eggs from the carton and actually put them in it for it to work, and that was a little too annoying for us. Then there was, of course, the Nest thermostat, but that's already been done to death. My husband's favorite.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi enabled crock pot, because I'm not entirely sure what the safety protocols on that are with regards to the heating element, and there's kind of a part of me that kind of finds the whole concept of burning your house down appealing from remotely, but I probably should stop there.
Yeah, we vetoed trying to break the heating element on that, and so we decided we should get something else. Then there was, yeah, so
we're continuing with his theme of uncomfortable medical analogies.
So, and then I looked at the smart water bottle in case you needed something that told you when you were thirsty. It would glow when it thought you were thirsty. But yeah, this also seemed like a bit of a stupid idea, so we ended up going with a baby monitor. So why a baby monitor? Well, I guess last year everyone started saying we should buy one for some reason, because we have this little guy. And we were like, well, why do we need a baby monitor? Oh yeah, that was the wrong picture. There we go, much cuter. We were like, well, we can always hack it. So we were like, sure. we'll get one. So we got this one. No, we're not showing all the name because we did responsibly disclose what we found and they didn't respond in any way. This was months ago. So we decided it was okay to present as long as we didn't let people know who the device was. So we sort of took out the name. Yeah, you could probably...
The company's changed names like 3 times, I think, since we bought this.
Well, if you really looked for it, you could probably figure it out, I figure, but we're just figured we'll try to be at least a bit more responsible here, and we'd like to do this. Oh, and it was the #1 bestseller, so another reason to look at this device. So before we jump into this device, our brief look at IoT security standards. I'll just mention there's Pony Express puts out the Internet of Evil Things report, which basically, according to the last one, quick summary was everyone knows there's tons of problems on the Internet of Things and no one is spending any money to do anything about it. I think that's probably the 2-sentence summary. Last July, I think it was, NIST did put out their special publication 800-183 called The Network of Things, which is a basis for talking about the Internet of Things in terms of security. It doesn't actually get into security, but it sort of starts dividing things out so you can talk about it. And they divided it into 5 sections, similar to what we did, except slightly different. They had the sensor, which was like the hardware, the aggregator, which was software that controlled that, the communication channel, obviously your network, the external utilities, which are like the mobile and web apps, and the decision trigger, which was more software. And then Microsoft has some data.
Microsoft is apparently attempting to do some stuff for securing Internet of Things devices. In their case, though, I know that they're not done with it, but it was supposed to be that they're actually doing it at the manufacturer level with third-party vendors. So I don't really want to say anything about it because, I mean, it might be wonderful, it might be bad, but it's not done. So, you know, it's really hard to kind of judge it. But Microsoft is one of the companies working on it. Again, I know Intel is working on some standard stuff, too.
Well, I will judge the Microsoft stuff a little bit. It was very Microsoft-centric, so you couldn't extrapolate it out generally, what I saw.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the thing with the Microsoft stuff was that they were actually trying to control the entire process. So while there might be third-party vendors, that Microsoft was controlling the firmware aspects of it.
All right, so before we started testing, our first thing we did was we took a look at the packaging and we read the manual that came with it. We set up a segregated test network and we brainstormed some ideal attacks. And that was going to help us when we went through testing because this was our goal, so we'd know what we were looking for to try to daisy chain things together that we found to reach one of these ideals. Okay, so what about the packaging? As you see, it makes you think it's very insecure right here because we get this login ID and password on the box. Note the password is admin. But it's not quite as bad as you think because the first time you do log in and with the device, it makes you change this. Not because it's the first time you log in, but because they require at least 6 characters for a password. So, but let's see, the manual had some other nice information in it about authentication authorization, which was interesting. Like, you had 2 accounts, so you had your account and you added your cameras to it, and this was the camera specifically that you could log into. And there were no forgot password mechanisms. So if you forgot your password, you had to create a new account. And so you could obviously add cameras to many accounts, and that would never look suspicious since that was the forgot password mechanism. If you forgot your camera password, you had to do a hardware reset to put it back in its default configuration. So it also had some information about guest accounts and authorization, which looked interesting too in terms of testing.
Now for the, we split our testing up based on what we were interested in, so I took the parts that I was interested in and she took the parts that she was interested in. I did the networking stuff on it, and for the first part of it, obviously we had a segregated test network. You know, I don't know how secure or insecure this device is, so I don't want to hook it up to my home computer.
So just to be clear, this is your home computer?
Yes. No. It's a random picture. Mine is much more modest. But This part's pretty easy. I mean, we just bought a router and, ran it off the other ones, but they had both networks that were segregated, but you can still have internet access. In terms of the ideal attacks that we were doing, I'll let her get to hers in a moment here, but what I wanted to do was insert fake pictures and videos into the feed because I just thought it would be funny. And
So you wanted to do device pairing?
Yeah, I just thought the device pairing of the camera with the apps was an interesting spot to try, and obviously, as I said about our ideal attacks, we were going to go through and enumerate all the bugs and vulnerabilities and then try to see how we could put together one of these attacks. So we came up with 5 areas of the IoT device: the mobile apps, the network, the web apps, the API, and the hardware. And my husband is talking about the network and the hardware, and I'm going to cover the mobile, the web apps, and the API. And the web app and the API sort of merge. It's hard to differentiate exactly where one begins and the other. And yes, we were trying not to break any laws, and so everything involving the external web application, APIs, and the external network was lightly tested. Mostly it was passive observation because we didn't want to do anything wrong. All right, so the mobile app. So basically there are 3 parts to testing a mobile app for both Android and iOS. You have your static testing, your dynamic testing, and your network testing. And for Android, the static is really useful, obviously, because you can just decompile it, and get your Java code and just go through it if you're good at coding, and it's really easy to look at. For iOS, it's more of a reverse engineering IDA hopper after you extract the encrypted app from memory. So it's a bit more complicated. Of course, there are tools that will do that extraction for you, but it's fun to walk through once on your own if you're getting to know iOS anyway, to manually go through that. But dynamic testing on Android, that's mostly using the Android debug bridge. And for iOS, I mostly use Cycrypt to, get in and do things when the app is actually running. And I did all my network testing using Burp Suite. Now, I don't look at any of the network results on any slides, but I'll just mention that neither mobile app did any certificate validation whatsoever. So I could just use Burp Suite, didn't have to import the CA, nothing. Okay, so just a few of my results. I'm not going to go into everything in detail because it would take too long. But yeah, I found insecure data storage, insecure communication, insufficient cryptography, extraneous functionality, and improper platform usage, which is 5 of the OS top 10 for mobile. Oh, we'll get to that one.
It's a surprise.
It's sort of my nemesis. I find this cryptography algorithm way too often. But some mobile app findings. Just a couple things I found in the Java code that were sort of interesting. Here's where it validated if you had a good camera ID, and you could see it just looked to see if it was 13 characters and started with that. So you could probably enumerate all the cameras out there. Here's a developer options password validation, which was just this hard-coded string. Let's see. Now this was, yes, some cryptography that I saw in there that they were using, and anyone care to guess what algorithm it was?
Slightly better.
It was actually a single DES. Yes, and unfortunately, I've seen this in at least 3 places in the past 2 years when I've been looking at things. It's just like, the first time I almost had an asthma attack and started laughing hysterically, and now just like, what, again? But yes. They did have other cryptography I'll mention too. They used it in several places and did several different things. Here's some where in the Android app they just stored the account usernames and passwords. So in plain text on the device. There are some other interesting things in the other shared preference file, including more usernames and some settings to turn on developer mode, where you could set encryption on and off. hid the IP addresses, as you can see, because, again, trying to protect this a bit, but of where the server was. And most of us, yes, okay. And let's see, yes, it was really easy to get into the developer options. In fact, I think I did that in 3 different ways. It was the same hard-coded password in both iOS and Android. All sorts of fun things. They actually did have some forgot password functionality, even though it specifically says there isn't any. And I'm just going to stop there and let him talk about network.
Now, we actually previously gave this talk at NOAACon, and one of the things that we got a lot of feedback on was the hardware part, so we're trying to cut the other parts shorter so we can talk more about the hardware, since that seemed to be something more people were interested in. That and, I mean, the network methodology, we really didn't do a lot of cool things with it because it just wasn't necessary. Used Nmap for it to just, enumerate the network, and then for as far as observing the internal and external traffic, he used Wireshark and Aircrack. The one finding that I had with it is that, there's all that. The asterisk thing I thought was weird, so I made a note of it to look for it later because when I looked it up on Google, it came up as a protocol for air traffic control towers. And I was pretty sure that that wasn't right. Additionally, you could go into you could open telnet sessions with it. Now on this, there was a setting to turn the device itself up on the web app to turn it into an access point. Additionally, it would go through and tell you every network it was in range of that it could see. This is beyond the scope of this talk, but there are attacks that you can take that information and coordinate roughly somebody's physical location. And the other nice finding on it is that there was no password or encryption if you set this as an access point. Additionally, there was no encryption whatsoever on the video or still image feeds. So you could find out around where somebody lived and then just war dial up and down the street until you hit it. Obviously, that's really, since these devices are for physical security, that's kind of a significant problem. But
now for the, I did something to this. Press the button.
oh, sorry.
All right, so just quickly the web application methodology, because everyone's familiar, at least most people are familiar with this. It's just like testing any web app. You want to look at your authentication, your authorization, session management, whether there's injection, client-side code, all the normal things. Well, the first thing I did on accident, because as a joke I named the device script alert 1/script, and yes, it was a cross-site scripting. I just thought it would be a funny name for my device. Not even really testing. As I said, we're trying to be careful about the external website and not really do too much, but I did notice going through just looking at the HTML that they had. It was the weirdest HTML there was because it was like it told you about all these other sites inside it. So it was like it was a shell, basically this thing that they use for lots of different sites. And so you found all these other versions of this web app that were out online, including some test versions and debug versions, things that were literally called that you were all out there if you went and browsed to them. And it was all just in the basic HTML when you went there. And so on one of the test ones, they had the spot where you could download a Windows, an Android, an iPhone, and a Mac version of a tool for this camera, as well as more documentation and, yeah, a test version of the app that you could just log into online. I didn't really like doing that, even that much. I figured it was passively observing, so we did go look at it. So I thought that was very odd. Also, you may have noticed when he did the network enumeration, there was an internal web app. Port 80 was open, so we could look at that locally. And so there, you could do more, in my opinion. And so there, it brought up an app very similar to the one that was online here. And that's where I looked at the client-side code, because there was a ton of JavaScript and also a Flash plugin. The Flash plugin was actually of interest, because it was what they used for the live stream of the cameras. And basically, it was an RSTP-based protocol with some built-in authentication. But the authentication was only one way, so the client would authenticate with the server and just got back that it was okay from the server, but the server didn't authenticate the client. It was weird.
And this was an unencrypted web traffic, so you could get the credentials and say, oh yeah, I'm the camera. This is totally legit. The other thing about it too with the web app was that we noticed what she was bringing up about the multiple pages. There were about 25 or so before I stopped trying to count identical portals on different IP addresses for just the main app. There was also stuff in the JavaScript about if camera equals X brand, go to this page. If it equals this brand, go to this page. Apparently they like to change their names very frequently for some reason.
And their branding, so they look a little different, yeah. All right, so now I'm going to go into the API methodology, which is sort of just part of the web app in a way, except it's a little different because you can't browse to it. But it's very similar to the web app, except no app. And basically, the first step was to try to enumerate all the API calls there were. And then check for all your common problems, was like poor transport security, IDOR, access control problems, sensitive data exposure, poor key handling are the common things with APIs. So I found the complete enumeration of the API in two places. It was actually completely in the JavaScript on the web app because it had basically the JavaScript made all the API calls, so you could see them. It was also in the Java code for the mobile app. So you could completely enumerate everything in the API. And so then after doing that, I tried replaying all the API commands and seeing what we could get, and there's no session on any of this. And so even a week later, all the API commands would still work. So then I started doing integrity checking to see if we could change up parameters, and sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. I think that the ones that didn't work, it was probably due to some malfunction in their code more than anything else. But yes, some of them worked, some of them didn't. It was just random as far as I could tell, but I made note of it. Also, when going through all the API, you could find some interesting information, like here, where it was asking about the NTP server. It also tells you about this debug telnet, which I didn't go to at all, but it was very tempting. But yeah. And some other random servers, with the debug telnet one was the one that, of course, yelled at you too. Oh, I want to go see what's there. Very possibly. Anyway, now.
In terms of the hardware, I kind of wanted to preface this with I don't really have a strong hardware background on this sort of thing. So if I can figure this stuff out, pretty much all of you should be able to too. You guys came up here, so obviously you're wanting to learn how to do things. So I mean, don't let the fact that you might be afraid of setting something on fire or anything bad like that, dissuade you from your dreams. Anyhow, what we wanted to do initially was just basically take the device apart so I could see what it was, like, see if I could identify the board, the Wi-Fi card, look for any sort of known vulnerabilities for it. Also, I did this last, obviously, because, I wasn't really sure I wasn't going to set anything on fire. But you could buy multiple devices in theory. I'm kind of crabby and cheap, so I wanted to just do it last instead. What you want to do is you want to look for a debug UART port. And then you also want to look at how the firmware updates, so you can see if you can get a copy of the firmware, if you can install your own firmware, and then does it have any sort of integrity checking. As a side note on this, the web app had a process of updating the firmware, but you could only do it if you were going from within your own network. You couldn't do it remotely. In terms of the hardware finding, I wanted to look for the debug port. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but it was kind of easy to find. So what I did was I just took some random jumper cables that we had from an electronics kit, soldered them to the ART port after using a multimeter to determine which port was which, and then just ran it through to a TTL to USB, and then hooked it up to a Raspberry Pi, since I didn't want to hook anything I'd soldered myself up to my home computer.
And that worked?
It worked, surprisingly enough. But here's what we had on the web app for the online update too, where you could do the through the internal network where you could update the firmware. In terms of any sort of checking, there actually was one. You couldn't see it through the web app. You could see it through the hardware though. But the CRC would fail every time. However, it would then boot as normal. Additionally, without doing anything at all, the CRC failed. So if you didn't touch the device in any way, shape, or form, the CRC fails every time for whatever reason, and then just goes on and boots.
And what he wasn't saying was when you click the upgrade button here, you could get a copy of the file, but it was a little roundabout. You had to be monitoring your whole network, because this sent a request out to one of those outside servers, and the outside server would contact your camera with the file. So if you had your whole network being monitored, you could grab the file.
Right, it didn't send like a exe or bin.
It wasn't sending like an exe or a bin file that you could run from your computer. It actually sent it straight to the camera. And additionally, obviously, if you're hooked up to the hardware, like I was able to do in that, in my case, you could just run it straight through. The other thing about it was that in terms of well, let me see if we have enough time. I'll try to go into it a little bit more if we have enough time. Oh, can I? Okay. But when I booted the device up after I did the hardware hack on it, it was really hard to get into. There was a thing that said press any key to stop it from booting. I figured that part out pretty quickly. Once you were able to do that, it interrupts the boot sequence, and then you could go in, you could download the firmware. If you wanted to, at that point, put in something that you made yourself, or just sort of look around the files, you could do that. There wasn't any sort of logging that you needed to do. The one big thing I noticed with this, which might have been one of the reasons that had all this flakiness in terms of some of the application stuff, is there was a lot of extraneous code. It looked like, and from my understanding, this is a semi-common practice, that they basically just cut and pasted a lot of code from random devices. So there were drivers for network cards that aren't for this camera. There was some stuff for cameras that, like for the actual camera hardware, that isn't part of this. And there was actually some stuff for the control board that, again, it was for something that it was just completely random as far as I could tell. Which might be why some of the things when we tried to dial out to them didn't necessarily respond that reliably.
This was really your slide, but there's also on the internal web app, you didn't have to go through the firmware. They had a nice upload button, so you could just get it at any file you wanted, and it would upload it to the firmware.
But I wanted it to do it through the wires I soldered.
So you could do it both ways.
Now, in terms of seeing if we could screw with the video feed, that is obviously not my pleasant son. Additionally, this is from the web portal. Additionally, I didn't take a time and date screenshot there, but the only time and dates that you had, if you had that option enabled, it was through the web portal itself and showed you the current time and date on the web portal. So if you're going through and taking that, intercepting the traffic and replacing it, if somebody was looking at it, the time would tell them the current time. I'm sure you can see where this is a huge security vulnerability, because there'd be no way for someone to know if the footage that they were looking at was from last week, or if it was actually current.
So this was really a combination of the fact that they pretty much had no security on their network stuff, no encryption, handshaking, sort of stuff going on with that in the device, and the fact that we had reverse engineered the flash file to know what it was expecting. So we sent the flash player that was giving the stream exactly what it was expecting in the packets, and it just it was basically like a man-in-the-middle sort of attack that did this. So, all right. So our conclusion: IoT devices are easy to hack.
Surprise.
Further, is there a way to use this device if we wanted to as a baby camera? Well, if it's not on any network that's connected to the internet, you can log into the internal web app And you can view images, although you can't move the camera around or do some of the functionality without internet access.
Actually,
And it's a still image from when you log into the camera. It doesn't ever update, so I actually think that this part is a flaw. That you were able to, if you refresh it and re-log in, it would update the picture. But other than that, it doesn't update the still image. So I think that that was actually a flaw that let you see that.
So yes, they don't like you using this without internet.
which totally is not shady.
So about setting up your own IoT lab. So we'll just go through some of the things we used for all of our different steps, and together you have an IoT lab. So first, for Android, obviously you want a computer. I only mention that because you really would like an Intel processor for the hardware acceleration modules for the emulators, because they're really slow without the hardware acceleration. You're probably going to use Android Studio and the SDK toolkits and the Android emulators and get lots of versions downloaded, both ARM and x86, and every time you do an ARM one, it will yell at you about how this is slow. But sometimes you need them for when the apps that you're trying to go through have architecture-specific libraries. And that's, unless you want to do it on real devices, if you have a lot of real devices, that's fine. You can do that instead. Obviously, you're going to use other tools that go with Android Studio, like the Android Debug Bridge to get show and install APKs and get APKs and debug things. And as I said, Android devices are really nice to have, but you don't actually have to have them. Although, what I always do, let all your family know that whenever they get rid of their old phones, you want them. That's what I always do. Everyone in my family knows if they're getting a new iPhone, a new Android, give me their old phone. I'll even pay them what they could get for it from someone else. So, for the reverse engineering part, I use Dex2Jar, APK Tool, and JDGUI. I know there's something that combines all that, but I got used to doing it, and it really takes, 15 seconds to run those 3 commands, so I'm not sure what the use of the combined tool is. It probably takes 5. And then I use Burp Suite generally for all the web stuff. For iOS, you always need a Mac because you can't look at any of that stuff on a Windows machine. You need Xcode, your iOS SDKs, which will give you OTool. You really need an iPhone or 2 or 3, several in different versions. And you really have to jailbreak them, although that is illegal in some countries. You need a way to get your files off, which iFunbox was great until iOS 8.4 when it stopped working. IDB is a good tool. Again, I use Burp for the network stuff. You need IDA and Hopper to do the reverse engineering of the apps. Cycrypt is great for doing things dynamically inside, and I sometimes like using Snoopit. There are a lot of other tools out there for iPhone, so I'm sure that some of you all actually know some great ones.
Yeah, and for the network lab that we set up, I mean, you're just going to want extra router. It doesn't really matter. You just want something that works. Additionally, though, you might want to verify that it's if there's security issues that are known with that router, because some things you can execute attacks to the universal plug-and-play. And for the monitoring network traffic, you want to get like an external USB adapter. I know that they make ones that are not alphas, but I've never actually seen them. Additionally, you want to make sure it's aircraft compatible if you're using that. So if you go to Aircraft's website, they'll actually have a list of ones that will run there. So again, that's probably why a lot of people use alphas. For the software part of it, I just used Wireshark, Aircraft NG, and TCP dump, which those are all built-in Kali tools. Just like what she was saying, there are lots of ways to do some of this stuff. So if it works for you, then it's obviously the best way, even if it's something different than what we did.
For the web tools, this one, I mean, everyone already has their favorites. Use whatever things you like. I like to use Burp Suite. I generally use Nick2, the development tools, and Firefox. I always use Firefox when I'm doing web testing as opposed to Chrome, although I use Chrome for all my personal browsing. I like some of the things like Dirbuster, Cool, SQL Map, BAP, which is a burp extension I enjoy using. Obviously, there are tons of web tools, and most people already have their favorites. For API tools, they're going to be very similar to the web, except you're going to have some specific extensions depending on what your API is. There are burp extensions that deal with WSDL and JSON and such. So depending on what the API is, you'll need something specific. And you sort of have to wait and identify what the API format is first.
Now, in terms of the hardware tools, I was trying to do this as cheaply as possible. So anyhow, what you'd want is a screwdriver set. If you get one, try to find one that has the precision screwdrivers, the smaller sized ones, because sometimes they're going to be very small screws. Additionally, a lot of them nowadays have the little nylon, there's like a spludget or whatever it's called. It's like a little nylon crowbar that you'd use for opening like phone cases or things like that. You're going to want a soldering iron, solder remover. In my case, I just used a regular TTL USB cable. They're like $10. There are lots of nice things to have, like bus pirates, Raspberry Pis, etc. The thing is that I would caution you that if you're not really sure why you need something, I probably wouldn't buy it. I don't want you getting mad at me about it because you bought something and never even took it out of the box. But I mean, I just feel like it's probably better to sort of, if you're going to get something with a purpose. Additionally, in terms of soldering, if you've never soldered anything before, you probably want to find something that you don't really care about to do at first. Soldering is sort of a skill set, sort of like painting or drawing. You might have a really good idea in your head of what you're doing, but your hands and the device might not necessarily cooperate, and then bad things happen.
I left off this list that he also used was a multimeter, which we meant to add to this slide when we noticed it last night, but didn't.
We have a baby who just got some teeth, so yeah, there's a little bit of a distraction. But in terms of the multimeter, instead of going through it with, I see we got a little extra time so I can extrapolate on this. Instead of using like a logic probe or an oscilloscope to determine which ports were which on the UART, I used a multimeter. You're able to determine, in the case of the one I had, there are only 3 ports, so you know that one of them is going to be ground, you know one of them is going to be transmit, and one of them is going to be receive. If you kind of figure out what about those voltages should look like, it's pretty easy to guess at that point. But and again, I mean, I was trying to do it at a certain point. It was kind of turning into a weird thing of pride about want to do it as cheaply as possible. So I figured a $10 multimeter versus an oscilloscope or a logic probe was probably the way to go.
All right, so some things I would recommend for further reading if you're into hacking Internet of Things. There's a really good book by Brian Russell called Practical Internet of Things Security. Obviously, there's a link to the NIST special publication 800-183 that I mentioned earlier, which is worth a read, as I said, because it's probably a basis for further NIST papers on security that they're going to publish later, maybe this year if we're lucky. Then there's the link to the Internet of Things Evil Report, and the Hack the World blog actually was a great site for starting hardware hacking, because we said
Yeah, I consulted this as I was working on this, because they actually had in this example where they walked through doing this with a router. Unfortunately, the one that they were using was a lot easier to solder than the device I got. It was I thought that I'd be able to get one and buy normal size pins and just push those through there, and apparently it was actually very, very close together instead, so it was a little bit more difficult. But yeah, it's a great site in terms of learning how to do some of that stuff if you're just sort of starting from zero.
Right, and so we have our contact information, and if anyone wants that. I have Twitter, he does not, he hates it. So, and besides that, we'd love to answer any questions, and we probably talked a little fast, sorry.
Yeah, additionally, yeah, in terms of if anyone wanted to, I could kind of go into the hardware process on that. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, so let's see if I can find the picture here.
You want me to do?
Yeah, could you do that for me, please?
Yeah.
But, so once I took the multimeter and, there it is. But once I took the multimeter on there for the UART ports and determined that that was the ground, that one was transmitting, that one was received, I ran through the jumpers and then soldered the ends off into there so that I could run the TTL cable to it. I just ran that through a Raspberry Pi and used Minicom to communicate with the device. Like I was saying earlier, during the boot sequence, there's just a, in order, if you need to pause it, press the any key. So I did that, and then it just drops you into a shell. So, I mean, this was, there wasn't anything to it. So, I mean, like I was trying to say, if you find some of this stuff intimidating, I mean, I was really scared to solder something because, fire. I mean, I was able to get this on first try. So, don't feel like that there's anything bad there. Yes?
A hardware hacking node on serial ports.
Yeah.
It's important to know if you're dealing with 5-volt TTL.
Oh, yeah.
3-volt TTL. Because the COM port on the back of your old classic computer is 5 volts, and the Pi and those 16 headers are 3 volts.
Yeah, that's another reason why I want to use the multimeter to verify if you're looking at 3 voltage or 5 volt. Because, again, that could also be a very unpleasant surprise. My case, I was a little less concerned about it because it wasn't a power cable. But, that's totally something to look at. Thanks about that. But, I mean, again, I thought it was really intimidating. It really wasn't once you actually get started. That's the hardest sort of thing sometimes is you just sort of get over the inertia and get started in the first place. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
I've heard some people do IoT hacking research where they will just watch the usage of the device and compare it and contrast it against its intended usage. You ever
Are you talking about like watching the network traffic?
Yeah, just like let's sit there and watch it run for a day or two and start asking, why is this thing calling home at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
Really using it?
That's actually how we determined it was dialing out to all those random cloud portals. But I just let it run for 2 days and, went through with Wireshark and looked at the traffic afterwards. Yes, sir.
You guys put your security resources up there. So you did mention the mud stuff, manufacturer usage design. Do you know that?
I'm sorry, I really can't hear you.
The mud, MUD, you guys didn't mention that. What's your opinion on that?
Manufacturing usage.
Oh, okay. The problem is that it doesn't seem like anybody's gotten far enough along the process to really have an opinion about it. I mean, I like the idea, but I also see, given some of the players involved, I see where things might go a little weird. I mean, ideally, the more open that these, it's like what the guy before us is saying. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name earlier, but it's like they're saying about the open source stuff. If you can see what's going on, that's great. If things are actually getting fixed, that's great. The problem that I have is that since nobody's completed it, I don't know if those things are being done. Yes, ma'am.
Are you planning to go full disclosure on this at some point to help protect locations of children?
I'm not really sure about the legal issues there, and I don't really like being sued. In terms of that, I mean, I'm not really sure what we can do because it kind of seems like they change the name of the company fairly frequently on a lot of these. One thing that, I actually did not do any looking at how people hardware hack these specific devices until after I was done because I didn't want to have anything sort of, prejudice what I was going to do on it. And after doing a lot of research on it, there are actually this is one of the more secure models. There are a lot of them that actually have hard-coded passwords of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And, yes,
Is there any precedent, maybe, inform Amazon about this? Maybe they'll quit selling it?
Yeah, I'm trying to be tactful here.
I've actually seen the tactic of putting some of the results in a 1-star review. I've seen researchers do that when they do not get a response from the manufacturer.
Yeah, it probably works better for people that have a lot of friends that can do it too, but
They'll contact you to try to get you to take the response down, and then you have something else.
But yeah, when we tried sending contacts to them, we got no reply whatsoever.
And we tried more than once.
But that's what you're saying, use the ones that
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting tactic. I hadn't thought of that.
I've seen Matthew Deere do that in his IoT research. He gets actually pretty good hit rate from that.
Yeah, I think that's also something that probably works better if you're sort of well known in the community or have a lot of friends, and I don't really meet either of those criteria.
Matthew was because they obviously didn't do any security research in their products. So.
Yeah.
Did someone over there have a question?
Oh, sorry.
Did you get any identifiers from the hardware itself? In the sense, is it a generic port that was kind of picked up in Shen's
Yes, it was, it was just a generic, the setup was through BusyBox, but it was just a regular generic setup. The board itself was green. I can say that without, I mean, it's on the picture, but they make a lot of hardware. They weren't the manufacturer of the camera, but they make a lot of underlying hardware for a lot of devices in general. In terms of any of their stuff, none of it was problematic. It was the Linux, the Linux distro that they set up, the camera manufacturer set up, that was the problem.
Personal non-security thing. The Rapid 7 has a lot of, well no, this part's security. Rapid 7 has published a lot about insecure baby monitors. So you can also look at that report.
Yeah, it does seem like baby monitors, there's a big overlap between baby monitors and IP cameras in general, and yeah, there does seem to be a lot of significant security issues with them. I mean, again, a lot of them that we were seeing when we were looking into them, they had hardcode passwords of 1 through 6.
Have you thought of just reverse engineering the control stream coming back from their server and re-implementing it on a security device like that?
No, because that would be illegal, so I wouldn't tell you about it.
I'm putting up security cameras at my own house, and so what I did was I went with an Amazon product that was number 1, not this one. It is power over Ethernet, and I'm wiring them up, and the Ethernet connections in a big blob of great stuff spray foam.
Oh God!
It's on to the power over Ethernet switch, which has, I'm providing it a server that provides this tiny server and all the network services it needs, so they're not even routed.
Yeah, I don't think you can see it in the picture on this one.
But this board, the board itself is kind of a generic board that Green puts out that a lot of people use. But there actually was a power over Ethernet function, but there wasn't anything plugged into it, so you could actually solder something to it to create that functionality. Yes, sir. I didn't look for that specific one on Shodan, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I figured I knew the device was insecure, so I just didn't really see a point in looking at it at that point. It just sort of seemed like cheating. Well, thank you everybody for having us. This is the second time I've ever actually talked to anyone before, so this is kind of nerve-wracking for me. I'm not used to being invited to places.
good so we can hear the whole room. Yeah. And Justin, we're good to go when you are.
Hey guys, we're going to start this closing keynote. If you don't mind grabbing a seat. Justin's been kind enough to join us from San Fran, so thank you.
Awesome, we're good to go.
We're good to go, sir.
Well, awesome. Well, first, I'm really stoked to be a part of Bsides Asheville. Some of you might know, some might not know, but I'm originally from that area. I left in 2014. About the same time I met Daniel for the first time, we had talked about doing the conference. As things were getting good and he made it happen with the help of some others, I took off to San Francisco, so I thought that might be my last Bsides Asheville, but he was kind enough to offer this spot to me, so thanks a ton for hanging around. I look forward to hearing this talk and being a part of the conference. So, to get right into what I want to talk about, I want to talk about my experiences on the user experience side of working in security and privacy. I had the pleasure of working for Freedom of the Press Foundation for a little over a year now. That's given me a lot of insight into what matters to users and the types of challenges you face when you're trying to interface complex security and privacy components to end users. Just a quick show of hands, who's familiar with Freedom of the Press Foundation or Secure Drop? Okay, so good enough, that's good. So for those who aren't, I'll dive a little into what Secure Drop does. That's our flagship tool at Freedom of the Press. And the premise is, if a journalist wants to interact with the source safely, the source has to have a fairly anonymous and secure way to interact with the journalist. And Secure Drop is a piece of software that sits on hardware that we physically install in a newsroom, like the New York Times, for example. And on their website, they have a landing page. And on that landing page is an onion URL. So the source grabs that onion URL, fires up to a browser, goes to the Secure Drop for that organization, and they upload files. Now, underneath the hood, this is a very complex orchestra of Tor, different cryptographic libraries. It's running on Ubuntu. There are a lot of different hardware hardening things that we do. So it's a really complex tool underneath the hood, but it's also complex for news organizations because oftentimes they don't have very apt Linux sysadmins on staff to monitor these applications, because once we install it, we have no access to it, and that's by design. We don't want to have access to any organization's Secure Drop. So it seems like a very convoluted process, and in many ways it is, but our target audience isn't the end consumer, it's the next Edward Snowden. So we're building a tool for someone who's actively being targeted by a nation state or local law enforcement. And it's interesting because the users using this tool probably don't have the technical aptitude to really get their head around what's happening. So it's been the biggest challenge on the user experience side for us. So that's just a quick wrap up of what I do in my day job. Outside of that, I've been paying a lot of attention to looking at cryptographic design as a subset of product design. So I've been working on a tool called PocketBlock for teaching cryptographic engineering to students, ranging from 8 to 18 and all the way up to corporate training and things of that nature. And that's about 10 years worth of research into cryptographic design and looking at how we can make things easier for developers. Because in the beginning of my career, I got really obsessed about math. And then I realized I was born far too late to solve any of the really cool math problems. So I started working on open source projects with developers, and I started saying, okay, we have really strong mathematical guarantees around cryptography, but developers are having trouble implementing it appropriately. And that's largely because cryptography is designed to be understood by cryptographers. The interface between crypto and the development community has been historically pretty poor. So, after Edward Snowden came about, we've seen lots of pushes for usability and ease of use in security tools. But the problem is that users still have a tough time using a lot of security products. And that kind of boils down to the fact that we interface a lot of the complexities to the users. And we've been doing that for decades. And it's a total disconnect between the crypto, the development, and the consumer communities. So yeah, just to wrap up about me, that's what I pay attention to, is how can we make things easier for developers and users at the end of the day. So I'm going to be talking about sort of the cryptographic context of security and privacy, but a lot of these things shift very well over to just general security and privacy as a whole and different components that I'm sure you guys work with every day. But there are some key lessons that I learned from working with cryptographic software, especially with SecureDrop. And number one, it's that nobody uses cryptography because nobody really wants to use cryptography. And I'll hit on that a little bit later. One of the key things I identified about crypto software is that it's a technological revolution, but it's not a consumer revolution. Show of hands, who's familiar with PGP? Okay, got some PGP encryptors in the house. So I'm going to crack some jokes about PGP, and I still use it day to day, just a bit. But after a ton of studies, we found that cryptography is something that's very low level, obviously. But users don't want low level security; they want high level experiences. They need what security and privacy provide through cryptography, but that doesn't mean they need cryptography itself. And through that research, we found that clearly we don't need better cryptography; we need better experiences. And that crypto is an implementation detail, just like security and privacy. The things that we expose to users, we probably shouldn't. And we've historically done a pretty poor job of that in the crypto space. But with PGP, who uses any other tools for email encryption? Show of hands. Okay. So PGP, for those who aren't aware, stands for Pretty Good Privacy. And it's an email encryption tool that's been out for a couple decades, a little longer than that actually. And the idea is that you set up public and private key pairs. If you want to send an encrypted email to me, you would use my public key to encrypt. I would decrypt it with a private key on my end, and vice versa. PGP, unfortunately, has gone pretty unchanged since 1991. It still asks users to understand this model of public and private keys. It asks them to choose the length of the keys, the algorithms they use to generate the keys. And these are all implementation details that shouldn't be exposed to users in the first place. Tim Berners-Lee posted the first description of the World Wide Web to Usenet news groups in 1991, and this actually happened a few months after PGP came about. So PGP really predates some early specifications of the web. And as a joke in pop culture, things that didn't exist in the time of PGP was the Pentium processor, Windows 3.1, the sitcom Friends, the Macarena, Zima, which I heard, oddly enough, is making a comeback, and Miley Cyrus. Those are a handful of things that didn't exist when PGP launched. Yet it's still a fundamental tool and something that we use in the flow of SecureDrop every day. Because if people want to have email conversations, however outdated we might feel email to be with things like WhatsApp and Signal and Wire and this whole new suite of applications for messaging, there's really no better way to encrypt email. And it's a very archaic tool in the fact that it hasn't changed since what we thought about user interaction and what was acceptable in the early 90s before the concept of mobile existed, before the concept of really doing everything in the social context on the web. And they've been doing studies about PGP for decades, academic papers and user studies where they had academics that weren't security minded sit in a room and try to use PGP, and they found over the course of 2 decades that the title was Johnny Can't Encrypt. Why can't Johnny encrypt? And it comes down to the fact that users don't want to encrypt. And one of the most important things I've learned over my career and this obsession with the mathematical to the development to the user details is that the user language that we provided over the years has been really poor. We expose a lot of the internals. We expose the jargon. We have this notion that users should be educated on this kind of thing. And then if you pay attention to the media and sort of how the Twitter conversations play out with the spat between communities, a lot of the blame is placed on the user for perhaps being negligent or not meeting us halfway in the security and privacy community. But the truth is, security and privacy are largely subordinate to lots of other things that users want to do. And this isn't because users don't care about security and privacy. It's just that they care about using software and using apps to extend themselves to be better versions of themselves. And that's user experience 101. But that really falls on deaf ears to a lot of the security community. Because they're designing for very adaptive adversaries. They're designing in very strict context. Whereas users just want to use a tool that does a cool thing. So there's been a mismatch, and that's been a hardcore area of research over the past few years. A few things were captured in the product design community about what a security and privacy tool would need to have in order to be useful. So they narrowed it down, they call it the 3 U's of product design for security and privacy. That's utility, usability, those 2 things added together equals usefulness. So let's go back to PGP. PGP, it delivers on the utility front. It's strong cryptography. It does a really good job of giving the user access to the strongest cryptography available. The implementations, it's sound, it's still being actively developed, even if underfunded. But we've had this code to look at for decades. So we know it delivers on the technical front. But it really falls short on usability. So what we end up with is a tool that's not very usable. It's not very useful, rather. Because the same handful of people that were pros at it back in the 90s are still largely the only people using it on a day-to-day basis today. If you're in the Linux community, you'll probably see software that's signed with PGP or GPG keys, GPG being the open source alternative based on the OpenPGP standard. But outside of that, my day-to-day communications with security folks, unless it's really mission critical, we tend not to go through the hoops of using PGP. And it's a little odd for someone in cryptography to admit that we don't use our own tools, but it just goes to show that it hasn't, the field in general hasn't really evolved well with the pace of everything else happening. And a lot has changed in 15 years. But PGP, to sort of shift away to the more user-facing side of PGP, another quick show of hands, who's ever used like a web-facing key server to pull someone's PGP, to look up someone's PGP? All right. So what's interesting about the key server is that for new users of PGP who have somehow managed to get a pair of keys set up and want to contact someone, a key server is essentially a public database where you can go in and you can type someone's first and last name or email address. And if they've uploaded their key to the server, you'll have access to it. So I started thinking about what PGP does at the command line and how this differs from what the key server does. So whenever you import someone's key at the command line or through PGP software, GPG actually verifies a signature on that key. So it has a way to verify if that key is valid. But what's interesting on the web application front of it for key servers is that key servers don't do any verification at all. And they shouldn't, because that sort of goes against the idea of the web of trust of PGP, where if you and I are friends and I introduce you to someone who you don't know, if I've signed their key and vouched for their key, then by extension, you'll trust them as well because you trust my judgment. So that's sort of the premise of the web of trust. But if a third-party server is doing verification, we're trusting someone who is outside of the web of trust. So this makes good sense within the context of that security model. So I took that knowledge that the web servers weren't verifying anything at all, and I went to the command line and I looked through some of the lower level tools that GPG has, and one of those is called GPG Split. And GPG Split will allow you to take a public or private key pair and split it into all its different packets. And if you've ever done this or really inspected the specification for PGP, you'll find that that's essentially what keys are. It's just a group of packets that are concatenated together. And PGP will let you take packets out. It'll let you add packets in. Obviously, it verifies things, so it's built in not allowing you to do anything that won't verify, that won't pass a signature check. But the web server doesn't know that. So what I found is that I could attach what they call a revocation certificate to anyone's public key on the web. And a revocation certificate is something that visibly states that you shouldn't use this key because it's compromised in some way, or it's no longer worthy of being used, whether we've lost the private credentials that go with it, or we feel that someone's hacked it. And on the usability front, when key servers were designed, they were meant to be an easy way to do key lookups for users wanting to communicate. But these things came about in the early days when the only people using PGP were very technically savvy. So the assumption was that you would never trust what you're getting on a key server without further verifying it. It was just to make rapid fire lookups a lot simpler and to parse data and make it more visible and legible. But as the internet evolved and as more people were getting online and needing to secure email, just the average Joe McInternet was using these key servers and assuming that, okay, this is a PGP key server, so I can trust the data that's there. But with an afternoon and some debugging tools, I was able to show that you can revoke anyone's key online. You can forge packets for anyone's key to say, okay, this illegitimate key that I just made is the real key, and this other key has been revoked, so you shouldn't use this one. So if you're the next Edward Snowden trying to reach out to the next Glenn Greenwald or Laura Fortress, and you use the key server, I could target all the high-profile journalists that have their keys uploaded. I could upload fake revocation certs to make you think that that key is no longer good, and I could upload keys that look like the real thing. And I could craft it in such a way that you'd have no idea. And when you import that key or you send email to that address, you really have no way of knowing that you sent, perhaps the next big leak to someone that's not who they purport themselves to be. So this was a really unique find because it represents usability within the context of the crypto community and what usability actually means to the user and sort of how these different trust models diverge. And even to this day, unfortunately, you find cases where the technical crowds that build these tools, they assume that people know not to trust the output of certain tools, that it requires some lower level interaction in order to further verify. That's totally not the case, and that's something that we look at daily in development for Secure Drop. It's not clear to us after a while how the tool looks to a user because we don't get active feedback from news organizations, and that's largely because we built the tool to be an island that we have no access to. So debugging that can be really difficult, and understanding the expectations of the user and the source become really difficult. And the key servers, again, it's something I would recommend you check out and look into as a really fun example of the importance of making sure that interfaces that you're exposing to the user have very clear goals in mind that match what the user expects. Because in the case of PGP, it's a tool that's still widely depended on, but the model for interacting with it's very broken. So any questions thus far? Can you guys still hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can. Can you
All
hear
right.
us?
Was there a question in the back? Or?
I have I do actually.
Sure.
Wait, so does this mean that I can forge a revocation certificate for my first PGP key that I've lost? That is like haunting me because it's the first one the key servers return?
Right, so here's the funny thing about that. And the reason I found out about this is because I wanted to see if you could unrevoke a key. And unfortunately, you can't. Once you upload something to a public key server and you revoke it, you can't change it because it's sort of write only. You can only write data to the public key server, which means you can add things to it. So keys that haven't been revoked, yes, you can add a revocation certificate to it. The downside is that if you don't have the original private key, if you've lost that, you can forge a packet that will show anyone finding your key on the key server that it has been revoked. Now, if they take that and try to verify that revocation certificate at the command line with their software, it will fail. So it won't appear as revoked. But for the purposes of showing on the key server, and that's because PGP key servers do no verification. So it assumes that whatever's in the packet is valid. It will display whatever information is there. And by extension, not only that, you can upload user IDs, emails to other people's keys. Yeah, which is it's really silly because you know, if someone's picking an email address and you happen to upload one that's first in line alphabetically, that at least in my experimentation is the one that shows up first. And some mobile PGP software really shortens the text that shows up on the screen far much more than a desktop browser view would. So you tend not to see a lot of the information that might indicate that there's forgery happening if you're knowing what to look for. So the case is a lot worse for mobile devices and information display. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the security implication is horrible, you know. Forging my way out of a key that I can never decrypt anyway sounds like a good use of a bad situation, but wow.
Yeah, so yeah, it helps out in that case because in the early days, the idea was that key servers would allow you to amend data, but there were very few people running them, so large numbers of keys were getting added. It got to a point where it was like, okay, once you upload the keys, they're there forever. And you can revoke them, fine. If you can't find, you just have to have another means of letting people know that it's not valid.
Any other questions?
But yeah, and there was another attack, which is actually a bit more severe. PGP uses hexadecimal IDs, and for a long time the convention was that people would be using the shorter IDs. And some adversaries, research groups, what have you, they found out how to forge the short IDs. So you might find a key that looks legitimate and the short ID matches, but if you were to expand it to its full form, it wouldn't match. But GPG would still let you import it and not really indicate that, okay, the first half of this ID matches, but the rest of it doesn't. So there were lots of problems that came about over the past 5 years as more and more people tried to start adopting PGP. And again, this goes back to the fact that this tool was developed by activists, it was developed by developers for a very specific use case for a very small number of people. But over the years, if you think about how few people were online, even in the late 90s, I remember not everyone in my circle having computers, and a smaller subset of those even having the internet. And back then, the idea that you could buy a book online was revolutionary. And very quickly we saw the internet flourish as a place for people to communicate and to interact. And these tools were really all that existed, and they just simply don't scale. But this shows the disconnect between the type of dialogue that the technical community has and the type of dialogue that the user community has, and sort of the lack of a bridge between these two worlds. So the good thing that came out of this is myself and a colleague, we were able to convince one of the maintainers of one of the larger key servers to remove this web interface. The functionality is still there. It's a bit hidden, so it's still useful to developers and people that really know how to use it. But it's not really in the face of the users. And I kind of mark that as a really good thing because, again, that's the first place that the general user will look to try to find that information. And sort of to cap things off on PGP, a little anecdote that I had with my dad. I was trying to explain the idea of public and private keys, and his idea of technology is that technology should do tenfold better than physical security as far as innovation. So he would expect nothing less than for whatever I try to explain to him in the digital space to wow him even more so than things that he interacts with in the physical space. So I'm like, okay, with public key cryptography, you have a public key that you share with the world, and you have a private key that you keep to yourself. And if someone wants to send you something, they use the public key, or you unlock it with the private. And he thought it was really odd that he only needs one key to lock and unlock his front door, his house, his car. But in cryptography, we need two keys. We haven't found a way to use one key. And of course, there's symmetric cryptography, which is a single key crypto mechanism. But here's an average user trying to understand basic cryptography, and we give them this model of public and private keys, and then we have certificates, and the idea of revoking those certificates, and signatures and webs of trust. You know, these things are very easy for us to understand because we work in security models every day. You know, threat models, that's sort of our sandbox. So we get what these things mean. But we can't assume that the average user does. And with Secure Drop, we certainly can't assume that you know, any potential whistleblower is going to have the technical skill that Edward Snowden has. And these are really hard challenges because academic literature really focuses on jargon that makes sense within the context of academia or industry for security and privacy engineers. So that there's still a lack of good communication about how to properly use tools. And I would implore any of you, you know, working on these tools, you know, when you have funding to invest in your product, earmark the first fruits of that for user experience and user interaction testing. And I know that might sound like you're taking away from security, but what you'll find is that usability is actually how you interface security to the end user. And you know, I'm sure a lot of you know that by now. I mean, things have changed drastically over the past 5 to 6 years as far as our understanding of how poorly usable tools can be. But that's probably the main takeaway that I've learned from just, you know, trying to understand security and privacy, not as a technical field, but as a people field. You know, really understanding how people think. You know, in operational security, OPSEC, that's a totally different talk altogether. But paying more attention to people and how they behave and use things, and how erratic and irrational people are in general, can really speak volumes to how tools should evolve to accommodate. And PGP is just one of those monolithic examples of something we still depend on that doesn't scale. But again, I use it, I support the tool. I think we've hit the ceiling in many ways as far as what we can do with email, since email leaks a lot of metadata anyway. So there are some hurdles we have to face in security. And it's sort of to lay off PGP, who's heard of TrueCrypt for disk encryption? Okay, so even more. So can anybody be willing to share their algorithm choice for TrueCrypt? What do you use? What do you prefer?
Speak loudly, whoever it is. No one? I don't think we're getting a lot of mumbling or not really an answer, so we're doing
all three.
All three of them. Okay.
Okay. All right. So TrueCrypt is another tool that's been around for a while, not quite as long as PGP, but instead of email encryption, it's for disk encryption. So you're creating encrypted volumes, and you can make it such that you can't boot into a system without providing a key. So it actually provides a lot more security than PGP does in that context. The downside of TrueCrypt is that it exposes pretty much everything you can expose cryptographically to the user. One of the first things they see is which algorithm they're going to choose. And there are a smorgasbord of algorithms they offer, from 2FISH to the advanced encryption standard to SHA-256 for hashing. And the obvious flaw in this is that nobody really knows what these things are, what they do. And they're essentially buzzwords that most people haven't heard of anyway. But I found that people will have silly metrics for how they choose to use algorithms. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Bruce Schneier, or has applied cryptography on the shelf. But Bruce Schneier is a cryptographer who developed 2FISH, which is used by TrueCrypt. He also developed Blowfish, another block cipher, many years prior to that. But he was one of the early easy to understand voices in cryptography and security and privacy. He was one of the few that could really talk to the layman about what all this meant in the context of the real world. So he's sort of a folk hero, a legend in the industry. And someone once told me, well, we use 2FISH because we know it was developed by Bruce Schneier and we really like applied cryptography. And that's not a bad metric for choosing an algorithm, but the problem is that TrueCrypt asks users to choose algorithms at all. The problem is that we ask people to select the length of the key when we should just choose secure defaults. Back before TrueCrypt shut their doors, and that happened very abruptly, they had a forum that was a very active forum but the longest running and the largest and most inflated thread on the forum, which was pinned at the top, was which algorithm should I choose? So here we have a tool that's a piece of decent open source software. It has lots of areas of improvement on the interface front, lots of things that they could be using user feedback to improve. Yet the one thing people were obsessing about is which algorithm they should use. When in reality, if what you're worrying about is whether someone can break the cryptography itself, that's a good problem to have if that's your active daily concern, because that's obviously going to be the harder problem. The likelihood of that happening is near zero compared to other flaws in the code. And that ties back into user language. Understanding that cryptography is not something that the end user speaks. It doesn't translate well into an end goal. But here we have another tool that's really the only one of its kind for disk encryption that's open source, that's widely available, that has reached this level of cult status that it's what people are pointed to when they ask about disk encryption. BitLocker for Windows was another good example of disk encryption being more integrated and baked in. But if you read articles today about what security should I use, what should I do, people are still going to recommend TrueCrypt. They're still going to recommend PGP. The unfortunate part is that they don't really lend themselves to being used either very safely or very easily. And no matter how I continue to obsess about cryptography, which still intrigues me and I'm passionate about it, a lot of the real world concerns today have nothing to do with the technology. It's just a lack of ability to converse with the user in a way that's meaningful. Earlier I said that security and privacy are subordinate to lots of other user goals, and I think that can tend to rub some folks in the security industry the wrong way. That security and privacy would be second string to other goals. But again, it points to what users really want out of products. Even if they're security and privacy products, they want to feel safe. They want to feel like empowered, better versions of themselves. Users really think along the lines of products. And if you look at the things that people use on a regular basis, you'll see that they've made those decisions based on the functionality of the feature set, not the security and privacy, and that they're willing to take certain risks for those better experiences. Facebook being a prime example of how powerful the network effect is. There's a number of attempts to sort of replace or shift users away from Facebook to more privacy conscious systems. But at this point, it's hard to compete with something like Facebook with the feature set and with the integrations and with the network effect of that. So you can very clearly look at other success stories from Silicon Valley and tools that people use and depend on, and you'll see that they don't really sell themselves as security and privacy first. And obviously they're taking a more active stance on building that communication out, that we're secure and private, we're paying more attention. But usability and the user experience, even when you're building something like a cryptographic tool like SecureDrop, once that's placed in the real world, a lot of it depends on things that aren't cryptographic or aren't really security related at all. It's just user behavior and the types of expectations that people have come to have from using other tools that they love. I'm sure I'll get a big raise of hands from WhatsApp users. Show of hands, who uses WhatsApp or has used WhatsApp? Oh wow, okay. That's a little surprising. All right, Signal, raise your hand if you use Signal. Okay, a few more. So what I would consider one of the biggest success stories in modern day cryptography that kind of goes overlooked is the partnership of Open Whisper Systems, which developed the Signal messenger application. They partnered with WhatsApp to build in the Signal protocol into it. And why this is important is that because overnight we got the announcement that over 1 billion users now have access to the strongest messaging crypto capability that exists, and they did that through this partnership with an open source company to build really strong cryptography into something that was already owning the market share of users. It was very usable. It was really hard to do better than WhatsApp on that front. And this is cool because, you know, back in the 90s when PGP came about, you had the original group of cypherpunks who had this dream that one day we're going to wake up and we would all be using hardcore security and privacy tools and be working in Linux terminals and hardening our systems. You know, and Linux has sort of permeated the industry, but the end user's not really, you know, paying much attention to it. We're still on, you know, Macs, Windows, what have you. But you know, this dream, while it wasn't realized the way that we might have put back in the 90s, we're starting to find that usable crypto and usable security isn't really a thing. It's not a target goal we should have. We should first work on building a tool that's usable in and of itself, and that it does something really well. And then we should secure that experience. Because I think that makes a better use of security and privacy within the context of reaching actual user goals. If you let user experience drive the building of a security and privacy tool, you'll end up with something that captures the actual threat model versus what you think it is or what it should be as a security engineer, as a developer working on products that depend heavily on security and privacy. And you know, we can look at sort of the evolution of how tools have shaped up. You've got PGP, which is on the lower end. It has a very low ceiling of usability. And then you have WhatsApp at the very top. You know, and people have reservations about WhatsApp because it's, you know, it's owned by Facebook. So there are trade-offs. There are, you know, things that might not be ideal. But we're finding that, you know, a lot of these things are the realities we're faced with. I won't really get too much into the Internet of Things, but people have mixed feelings about coffee makers and toasters and refrigerators being connected to the web, and that's all fair. You know, but the reality is that, you know, innovation happens much more quickly than our ability to secure those innovations. You're not going to find academic papers, at least that I'm aware of, that cover the threat models of refrigerators connected to the web. And we might start doing that. We probably should. But we can't stop innovation, and we shouldn't expect security and privacy to prevent really cool and amazing things from happening. So again, I would implore, you know, the first fruits of any funding you get, really pay strong attention to your posture as far as user experience. You know, working on a very niche application like SecureDrop, it's easier for us to say, okay, this is for the next Edward Snowden, this is for people targeted by nation states. It's okay if it's complex, that's the best we can do. But in reality, the users interacting with it, the regular users, they just have really important things to say. So we have to look at it the same way that they look at all the apps that they use on a regular basis. We have to understand the user goal and build to accommodate those user goals. Any other questions thus far? All right, go for it.
Yep, go ahead.
So do you think there is an inherent trade-off between usability by the users and protecting yourself from a nation-state action?
One second, I can hear you. We're going to try an experiment here. Let me bring up this.
All right. Can you hear me?
Give that a try.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello.
Justin, can you hear?
Okay. So is there? I mean, usability is important, but do you believe there's an inherent trade-off between complexity of protection and usability? Because clearly, you know, if a nation state's after you, then WhatsApp's not going to protect your communications. And so it seems like there's some inherent trade-off between those two that you have to make as a designer of a tool. And I just wonder what your thoughts on that were. Is that what you believe, or is that maybe there's some kind of usable encryption that'll protect you from a nation state and no worries?
Right. The important thing to know about cryptography, you know, historically we've exposed it to the user, and a lot of folks have come to believe that that's reasonable, that users should have to make cryptographic decisions. So I think the first mistake is that traditionally we build security and privacy tools with the assumption that users should be involved in that decision-making process. And that's what really hampers the usability and the user experience, because users are going to be asked to make decisions that they don't really understand. So in the short term, you know, the downside to the kind of hole we've gotten ourselves in is that users do have to make trade-offs with certain applications. You know, PGP you're trading off pretty much all usability for a really strong guarantee of security. Whereas if you use WhatsApp, you're getting the usability, but you're trusting Facebook, which you might or might not want to do, especially if you're worried about nation states or law enforcement, who might have a strong arm to coerce someone to give over data. So there is, the unfortunate position that users find themselves in is making those trade-offs. I don't think that's what has to be the case. I think there's a lot of really good research happening now that I'm also involved in, reframing the way we look at the evolution of security and privacy tools. And I'm specifically looking at cryptography in what I call CRUX, or crypto plus user experience. And doing this means that we're not thinking of security and privacy decisions as security and privacy decisions. We're thinking of it in terms of sort of user behavior and product design. We're trying to mimic a lot of the other products and tools in the consumer space that do what they do very well with really high assurances of things going correctly. We're trying to model the interaction in a way that we can give users feedback to let them know they're safe, but we can make safe default choices for the user. Of course, what you run into there is you have, as you know, power users, people that do understand what's happening, and they don't want to be taken away from the slower level experience of tweaking things. So there's a trade-off there. Do you build products with that capability, risking that the average user might find that and get into it and get confused? Do you try to accommodate different levels of aptitude when it comes to the user? So there are lots of open questions. One of the big open questions with encryption, especially with messaging and emails, you have fingerprint verification. So you still have tools that, while they may be very usable, the only way to know for sure is to actually phone a person and have them read out code words or read out strings of fingerprints or scan a QR code from someone's phone and import it and double check that these hexadecimal strings match. So there are some open questions as far as what we are exposing and what we can hopefully not have to expose in the future. So some of this is, we can remedy this by bringing in more user experience designers and user interaction specialists into the design process. I think we can make lots of better choices that way. On the other hand, there are things like fingerprints, which we clearly need more academic research, more user studies, more innovation to get a better sense of how we can allow users to verify each other in meaningful and sane ways without exposing a lot of internals. So just to summarize, hopefully the answer to your question is that yes, there are trade-offs now as a result of poor decisions over the decades, but I feel that if we pay more attention to the product design element of security and privacy and user behavior, that we'll in the future have better tools that are more secure by default and where we don't have to make those trade-offs. Any other thoughts or questions?
What about in non-peer-to-peer messaging situations? So PGP, for example, when you add smart cards, becomes useful in business environments where you might have information that goes through it gets submitted, and then it gets shut down, it gets encrypted until it gets all the way to a back office situation where a physical key is picked up from a safe. There's not a lot of other software protocols that let you put that together. Thoughts?
Right, are you referencing something like a YubiKey, for example?
Actually, yes. YubiKey or the Crypto Smart Cards.
Yeah, so I'm actually working on an experimental guide for setting up GPGM YubiKeys for use within the context of secure drop. And you're right, it's tough. What we have to do, at least for, let's say, signing releases for secure drop, we have air-gapped systems. So the development machines that we have connected online that we do development work on, if we're going to do any actual key management or GPG signing, this all happens on the air-gapped machine. So it's still a very laborious protocol of someone getting up from a computer, taking a smart card, taking some writable media, and manually signing on a machine that's never connected to the web, that we've stripped out all the wireless components. So yeah, the ceremony around using hardware tokens integrating this into the software sense in an easy way. It's still not fully fleshed out. We joke in the office that we can afford to buy everyone in the world with YubiKey. We would, because we think that's a really cool way to give users something that they're already familiar with on a product level. You know, people have keys on the key rings, and YubiKey fits on your key ring. Very durable. It's actually smaller than a key. So the design affordance of these hardware tokens is there. It feels familiar to the user. So if we can leverage that, better work that to the process where everything that the user does is happening on a hardened smart card, and it eliminates a lot of the interactions they have to have, then all the better, for sure. Any other thoughts or questions?
We have run out of time, sir, but we really do appreciate you joining us and being our keynote speaker.
Awesome. And if I may close with one thing.
Go for it.
Here. I have 3 kids, and they're really big fans of Little Prince. We have a pop-up book of Little Prince. I've come to really love the works of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And in one of his publications, Citadel, in French, he makes a very important point that I think resonates very loudly in what we're building as security and privacy folks. And it's sort of a paraphrase. The quote is that, if you want to build a ship, don't throw wood and tools at a group of people and say, here, build this ship. Teach them first to get really passionate and excited about being on the open sea, life on the open sea. Make them love that. And then they're going to build the tool because they're going to have that very clear user goal in mind of what they're going to achieve. And the same is true for what we're building, whether it's at Freedom of the Press or the tools that you guys work on. That if you pay close attention to the user and what excites them and what their goals actually are, you're going to build a better tool that gets them there, and they're going to be more excited and empowered by using it. So yeah, I like to close with that because it's a very poetic way to show that we're building tools for end users, and we have to stop preaching to our own choir. We need to pay more attention to the end goals that people actually have, and let that shape the tool, and not be paranoid to the extent that we want to take away and trade off to the side of security, whether we want to make trade-offs that allow users to feel empowered and find better ways to interface what we do with what they actually want and need. So yeah, that wraps it up for me, but thanks so much for hanging around. I'm sure they'll have my contact information. Feel free to ping me on Twitter. Love to carry on discussions outside of this if you want to learn more about what I do or what I think. I'm happy to have a conversation.